If you work with gold luster and ceramics, you're probably familiar with the Duncan brand. Their premium gold luster was kind of the standard, really smooth, easy to work with, turned out great pretty much every time I used it. But recently, probably within the last year or so, Duncan discontinued their entire luster line, and it's been quite a challenge to find a good replacement. As someone who's primarily focused on making jewelry, I add gold luster to pretty much every piece I make. It adds something so special, that little pop of shine, and once I started using it, I just couldn't hold back. So if you're not familiar with gold luster, it's basically 22 karat gold suspended in sort of like an oil-based solution, and you paint it directly on top of glaze. And you fire it at a low temperature in the kiln, and it basically bonds to the glazed surface. I never had any issues with the Duncan brand. Honestly, I was kind of spoiled. It turned out pretty perfect almost every time I ever used it. I used to fire it at cone 018, and I would apply it pretty thick, kind of inconsistently. And yeah, I never really had many issues. So when I heard that they were discontinuing, I figured, well, there's other lusters out there, not the end of the world. But little did I know, not all luster brands are created equally. And this past week or so, I had quite the learning lesson in working with other lusters and getting some really tough results. So I'm going to share with you what I went through, basically, and how I troubleshooted and tested to come out on the other side and end up with a successful firing using a different brand. I actually have a few different luster brands in my studio right now. I have Western Glaze Co by Clay Planet, and I bought that through Kentucky Mudworks. This one seems to have the highest gold content according to their website. I think it's 14%. I have New Mexico Clay Company. That one is 11%, so same as the Duncan Premium. And then I also grabbed a bottle of Laguna Gold Coast, which is the lowest gold content at 5.5%. For this specific batch of work, I'm just using the Western Glaze Company brand, but if it would be helpful, I would love to do a video testing these 3 different brands to help you figure out the best results if you have that brand. So comment below if that would be helpful. I'm going to start off by recommending that regardless of what I show you here, you should definitely do some testing in your kiln before you fire a big batch of work like I did. Every kiln has its quirks, some fire a little hotter than others, even at the same cone. Ventilation and airflow might be a little different in your kiln, and all these factors actually can influence the results of a luster firing. Given how expensive luster is, I mean, a little 2-gram jar is $75. I would definitely recommend doing a little testing in your kiln first. I applied the Western luster to hundreds of pieces of jewelry. It took me several hours, and I just figured, oh, it'll turn out just fine like every other time I've done luster. So starting off, I was applying the luster pretty thick, and I wasn't super focused on consistent lines. Once the application was done, I loaded up the kiln with all the pieces, a couple shelves worth. I used bead trees to hang some of the work that had luster on the surfaces that might stick to the shelf. So I set my kiln at cone 018. That's what I've always done for the Duncan brand, and it always worked great at that temperature. Technically, the bottle for the Western Glaze brand recommends firing between cone 019 and 017. That's kind of a big range for something that can be so sensitive, so I don't really know why they have it listed like that, but so I just went with cone 018 like I always had. When I finished firing and opened the kiln, I could tell that something was off right away. On a lot of the pieces, the gold luster looked really dull and matte and almost kind of crusty, and as if they were rubbing off or that they burned off or something. At first, I thought maybe I overfired and fired too hot. I also wondered if I applied it too thin, because in my brain, I computed the light result and the kind of burned off looking result as being maybe too thin of an application. The way I calculated it in my head was that maybe I needed to go back in and add more and refire again. Well, that's partly where I went wrong. So I consulted a clay community on Facebook that I'm a part of, and I was chatting with a few of the members. One of them is a really prominent person in the clay community who I definitely trust their advice. He asked me a series of questions about like how I applied the luster. Was it kind of pooling a little bit? Yes, it was. I applied it pretty thick. And ultimately he said that I went too thick, and that's why it ended up looking like this. And my mind was kind of blown. Like, I would never have guessed that on my own, but I decided to take his advice to heart. The next piece of advice that I was given was to run another cone 6 glaze firing. Again, that's something I wouldn't have guessed that I had to do. I actually, in my mind, was like, oh, I'll just apply more on top of the crappy luster and fire again. But that probably would have resulted in even crummier results, because layering luster on top of like a crusty surface would not have been good. So I ran another cone 6 glaze firing to burn all of the crummy luster off of the pieces that didn't work out, which was about half of my work. And then the plan was to start from scratch and reapply everything. But first I decided to do a little test firing. So I found a tester mug in my studio that had been glazed and had a shiny surface, and I applied different lines of the Western Glaze luster to that glazed surface in different thicknesses. So I started at the bottom with like a really thick line, kind of similar how I did on my pieces that didn't work out. And then as I moved up, I lightened the pressure a little bit until I had a very thin line at the top. Now, to figure out the kiln temperature, like I said, Western Glaze Company had a really wide range of temperatures that this luster should be fired at. So I had no idea where to land in that, and obviously the cone 018 didn't work out very well. So I was snooping on their Instagram page, and I saw that this woman had posted some jewelry that she made using the luster, and she happened to post what cone she fired at. So she mentioned firing at cone 015, but she said that her temperature was around 1350 degrees Fahrenheit. These kilns can kind of vary a little bit, so I decided to go with the temperature instead of like getting hung up on like what cone she was firing at. So I went with a cone 017 so that I could be around 1350 degrees Fahrenheit. When I opened the kiln and checked out the tester piece, sure enough, the thinner lines turned out so much better. So thank goodness for the clay community on Facebook. It's called Clay Buddies. I never would have guessed that's where I went wrong. And yeah, the thinner the better with this brand at least. So once I saw those results, I felt so much more confident moving forward, and I reapplied thin lines to all of my jewelry and fired again at the cone 017, otherwise 1350 Fahrenheit, and hoped for the best. When I opened the kiln after that second firing, I was so grateful to see that the results were tremendously different, and the pieces looked so much more vibrant and shiny and kind of exactly what I was hoping for a luster firing. To see that shiny gold reflecting back at me was such a relief. The whole process was kind of an emotional roller coaster because I had my whole fall collection in there. I had an order I'd been working on for a boutique. I just felt very worried that I wouldn't figure it out and that I would waste more time and more luster in the process. So I guess my advice is like, test when it comes to luster, talk to people, check out Clay Buddies on Facebook. There's so many helpful people in there. Feel free to message me. I'm here to help. Reddit is pretty helpful too. I found some cool people on there. And yeah, I think we all have to kind of stick together and help each other out. I know so many other people that are dealing with this frustration since Duncan discontinued. It's just amazing how finicky some of these other brands are. So again, if you would like me to do more testing with the luster brands I have, I would be more than happy to do that. Comment below, let me know. And be sure to subscribe to my channel just so we could stay in touch and stay connected about all of this.